Very welcome to Tala Library. Before I go any further, mobile phones on silent, please. In the event of emergency, follow me straight out through the door there, up the steps and away to the left-hand side to await the arrival of help, okay? So mobile phones on silent, please. And just to let you know, folks, tonight is a very, very special night in our lecture series calendar. We have a lecture. This lecture tonight is presented by Tala Historical Society and South Dublin Libraries, and we're most grateful to Professor Padraig O'Riain here for giving this year's Leo Swan Memorial Lecture. I'd like to welcome Leo's wife here, Verity Swan, and any other members of the Swan family who are here present tonight. So just to let some of you know, some of you may have known Leo, regrettably I did not, but just to let any of you, Leo died unfortunately in 2001 and is fondly remembered in the Tala area as an encouraging and inspiring teacher and former principal of Our Lady of Loreto Primary School. He was also a founder member of the Tala Historical Society. While teaching, he was involved in archaeological investigations and in lecturing on archaeology. In the early 1990s, he gave up teaching to concentrate full-time on archaeology, setting up a company, Archtech, which specialised in archaeological assignments of threatened sites. He led the archaeological excavation. I thought I was going to get hung up on archaeological there. Concentrate. At Temple Oak House, where he discovered early Irish glass. He was also a pioneer of archaeological investigation using aerial photography. And from its beginning in 1995, Leo was a great friend of the County Library, and it was thought most fitting that the County Library and Tala Historical Society pay a fitting tribute to Leo by holding an annual lecture here in his memory. So that's what we're here for tonight. This lecture is presented by Professor Padraig O'Riain. He is Professor Emeritus of Early and Medieval Irish at University College Cork. The previous holder of visiting professorships at Bochum and Freiburg, Germany. And Aberystwyth. I got my tongue around that. He's a former holder of the Parnell Fellowship at Magdalen College, Cambridge, and he was the first Irish scholar to be awarded the Humboldt Prize. A former president of the Irish Texts Society, and that's nothing to do with mums. Okay? And a former member of council of the Royal Irish Academy. Professor O'Riain is the author of numerous publications on Irish place names, personal names and textual transmission. Among his published works are a Dictionary of Irish Saints and Feast Days of the Saints, a history of the Irish martyrologies. Now tonight, this lecture that Professor O'Riain is about to present to us is on the Irish Saints and their feast days, the Tala contribution. Okay, so take it away, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I presume that you can all hear me.
Yes. Thank you.
I'd like to start by saying that it is a great honour to me personally to have been invited to give this year's Leo Swan Memorial Lecture. I never had the pleasure of knowing Leo. Archaeology isn't exactly my field, but I'm sure that if I had, that he would have come across as a very engaging person indeed. I know that the memory of him here in Tala is a very warm one, and that he made a huge impression locally. I don't know how far his interest in martyrology would have gone, but at least he would have been, I'm sure, very interested to hear what Tala had to offer in relation to martyrologies, and I'll be explaining the term martyrologies to you later. You couldn't have chosen a more appropriate time of the year to ask me to come along to give you a lecture here in Tala, because today is the beginning of the 3-day celebration of the feast of a very famous Irish saint. The saint in question is remembered on the 12th of December. He has nothing to do with Tallaght, but he's remembered on the 12th of December at Clonard in County Meath. And his name is Finian. And Eanglas, who was here in Tallaght and who wrote a martyrology that I'll be talking about later, commemorates him as you have it there on the screen. A tower of gold over every sea plain. He will help me to help my soul. Finian, the fair of vast Clonard, a lovable starting point. Indeed he is a lovable starting point, and not just to help me to help my soul, but a lovable starting point generally for this lecture, because if you go to my Dictionary of Irish Saints, to the entry on Finian there, you'll find, among much else, the statement that Finian was part of a cult that grew up around a namesake of his, Finian alias Finbar, of Movilla in County Down. And it was this connection, through another namesake of the pair, that is Finbar alias Barry, patron of the Diocese of Cork, that set in train the circumstances which led to me receiving the invitation to come along here tonight to lecture to you. And in case there are people here who haven't heard about the circumstances that preceded, as it were, my Dictionary of Irish Saints, I'll fill you in. The dictionary might never, or would probably never have been written had I not received an invitation in 1975 from Elizabeth Shee, Honorary Organiser of the Cork Historical and Archaeological Society, the equivalent of your Tallaght Society down in Cork, to prepare a lecture on Saint Finbar. Finbar, alias Barry, Barry is a pet form of Finbar, is patron not only of the Diocese of Cork, but also of the parish of St. Finbar's in Cork City, and this is the parish in which I was born, grew up, spent the first 30 years or so of my life. And growing up, you couldn't fail to be conscious of the saint. It was the done thing for boys in the parish to adopt the name Finbar at confirmation. And if you were handy at football or hurling, you went on to play for the team named after him, the Bars, or St. Finbar's, which I also did, in football at every level, including senior. Even winning a coveted county senior football medal with the team as far back as 1957. Now, I perhaps, given that Finbar is so well remembered in Cork, I suppose I should have anticipated some of the reaction there was to my lecture when I gave it in 1976. As I went on, I noticed that faces were clouding over in the audience and becoming glum. I hope that doesn't happen here tonight. And notably, the face of one of our best-known local historians down in Cork, the late C.J.F. McCarthy, who was seated in the front row, as here in the picture, as was his custom. And
are we allowed to ask where the lecture was in the photograph, the building?
The lecture in that particular building was actually if my memory serves me right, this isn't the lecture that I gave on St. Finbar, but this is another lecture that took place in the Freemasons' Hall in Cork. I may be wrong there, but that is my memory of it. Now, people in Cork hold Finbar in very high regard. Admittedly, they are prepared to say that he was of West of Ireland extraction, but he was born in Cork and was very much one of their own. And they point out still the place that he was born. Now a ring fort called Garans, about 10 miles or so west of the city. However, I went on to say in my lecture that Finbar not only wasn't born in Cork, but that he probably never set foot in the place. And that what came to Cork was not the person Finbar, but devotion to him. The cult of St. Finbar. In the same way as saints' cults travel nowadays. From the place where they were born, possibly very far away, because of the fame that they have attained as a result of whatever they did during life to attain the aura of sanctity. In the same way, I argued that the original cult of St. Finbar was at a place called Movilla in County Down. And this contributed quite a bit to the upset that was felt by Cork people. Because Movilla happens to be in the heart of Unionist Ulster, as the 1910, the results of the 1910 show us here. Reaction to my lecture was immediate. That same evening, it was carried in a news bulletin on Radio Éireann. And a week later, there was an editorial that you can see in what was then the Cork Examiner, now much more grandly the Irish Examiner, which deplored the loss my lecture, my statement on Finbar entailed for Cork. And referring to me, not once but twice, as the Reverend Professor, a status to which I have never had any claim, it went on to say, to add insult to injury, the speaker or the lecturer stated that the cult had originally in northeast, southeast Ulster. Not to be outdone, the Sunday World tabloid, a Sunday or two later, came out with the article that you see on the screen, when the saint comes marching out. And there's going to be no jubilee in Cork, they said. Finbar was the County Down man. Reaction within the Cork Historical and Archaeological Society was very swift as well. Within 3 weeks, the late C.J.F. McCarthy, who was being honoured as one of Cork's most notable antiquaries, and a well-deserved honour it was indeed, took the opportunity to reply to my lecture on St. Finbar, stating that since my recent lecture, he had carefully gone over all the sources which he had studied in former years, and while he had great regard for my scholarship and erudition, he was convinced that on this matter he was in error. That I was in error in some vital respects. That St. Finbar was in fact the historical figure who has come down to us in lore and tradition. In addition, the then county librarian in Cork wrote to me, Padraig O'Riain, requesting a copy of my paper. He wasn't there on the evening, on the grounds that local people were disturbed by the report that I had questioned the existence of St. Finbar and needed to be reassured In fact, I haven't questioned the existence of St. Finbar. I have merely questioned his physical presence in Cork. In any case, Padraig O'Riain went on to publish in the next issue of an Irish periodical called Agus, a statement to reassure his readers that as sure could be, Cho Cinte is atá Cinte an. Finbar was buried in the cathedral graveyard in Cork, where it was high time to erect a memorial to him. We're still waiting for that memorial, incidentally. Ever since, whenever publicity has been given to the view, presented by what I had to say that night, that Finbar had never really been in Cork and that it was his cult that came there, as when I published the editions of The Life of St. Finbar, I think it was in 1994, and also a book on the making of a saint, how he came about, how the legend, as it were, grew up. Whenever that has happened, there has been publicity, there has been reaction to it, locally and even nationally. And two amusing comments from that time may interest you. One was from a man named Davio Cronin from Galway, who wrote to the Irish Times, saying, to minimise the traumatic effect on the staff and students of UCC over the revelation that St. Finbar never set foot in the place, may I suggest a minor change to the college's motto. You know, the college's motto in Cork is that where Finbar taught, let Munster learn. And the little emendation that he recommended was, why not where Munster thought that Finbar taught? And the well-known senior civil servant, former civil servant, T.K. Whitaker, in the course of a lecture he gave, a speech he gave in University College Cork, remarked that while Cork, or UCC, unfortunately up to now, had been a godless college, like all the Queen's colleges, now also it had become a saintless college. The cult of St. Finbar, of the old saint, was a very vigorous one that travelled throughout Ireland, as we'll see in a moment, and also went abroad. It went to Wales, for example. Down in Glamorganshire, on Barry Island, which is named after the saint, you have the remains of his church there, which are slap bang in the middle of what used to be Butlin's holiday camp. I don't know if any remains remain today. It went to Wales. It also went to Cornwall, where they had trouble in spelling the name. St. Finbarus is the dedication of the local church in Foy, which used to be, it's on the south coast of Cornwall, it used to be a point of embarkation to the continent. And then you have St. Finbarus's road as well. The cult went to Scotland as well. Travelled north, as far north as you can go in Scotland, to Caithness, which is the furthest north dedication to the saint. The church dedicated to him there, which you see on the screen, is probably best known now, not for its connection with St. Finbar, but the connection with, you know? No, I don't think so. Maybe it is as well. But I was thinking of the fact that a certain celebrity was wed there some years ago, a person by the name of Madonna. And then also, I doubt if Finbar had anything to do with that.
A fellow saint.
And then also, in the Hebrides, you have the island of Barra, which is named after the saint, and here you see a statue of the saint on the island. In Movilla, the
local clergy never had occasion to write very much about their saint. They didn't produce a life, for instance, of the saint, perhaps because they had no need to do so. But we do have a life, and it comes to us from, of all places, Lucca, in Tuscany, in Italy, a place that is well worth visiting. We've been there several times. In there, the saint is called Frediano, and the local people, under the influence in the medieval times, this is now the 12th century, under the influence of the idea that Ireland was an island of saints. How wrong can you get? An insula sanctorum. They identified their local saint as the equivalent of Finian of Movilla. And they produced a life of their local saint with elements in it that were brought to them from Ireland and that spoke about County Down, various people who were associated with the place included. The way in which it would have come there is by way of pilgrims, passing pilgrims, clergy who would have been travelling to Rome, because Lucca at that stage was on the route from France to Rome, the pilgrim's route, the main route if you like, from France to Rome, the Via Francigena, a route which you can now walk along yourself because it's like the road to Compostela in Spain. It has now been opened up, as it were, to walkers and tourists. Now, the cult came to South Dublin as well. If you look at the list there on both sides, it's the same saint right through. Finbar and all the different places he was associated with. And Biden is the same as Finbar. Finbar means fair-headed, and Baird Fiún means headed. And the two names were interchangeable. That's why you have Barry in Cork as a pet form of the name Finbar, because the two names are the same. But in any case, you have two sites there in South Dublin. You have Kiel Adre, which is Killigrew in modern times in the parish of Powerscourt, and you have Finbar of Killinalredere, which is Kilwardley. Nowadays, you have the remains of Killigrew Church. There's not much left, and you have Kilwardley House, which is probably at or near the site of the original Church of St. Very little has been recorded about the saints, the saint associated with the two places. We do know what the pedigree that was given to Finbar of Killigrew, and it assigns him to a tribe or a family called the Dáil Meishin Corp. And the importance of that is that it's the people to whom Kevin of Glendalough also belonged. And this underlines the fact that churches in this part of Dublin were, at that stage, early Christian times, they were affiliated to Glendalough, to the Church of Glendalough. Now, so much for the ramifications of the feast day of Finian of Clonard, that you'll all be celebrating, I'm sure, now in a couple of days' time. I've been using the word martyrology, and of course the word is of primary importance for you here in Tallaght because of the martyrologies that we have from the local church here. And whenever I type the word martyrology onto the computer, a red line comes out of it immediately because it's not an everyday term. And they think that I'm either misspelling it or that the word doesn't exist. It very definitely does exist. And on the right of your screen you see the Latin form of it, martyrologium, martyrologium Romanum, the Roman martyrology. And this is the martyrology that is used nowadays throughout the Catholic Church worldwide, except that it would be translated into the vernacular in the various countries where it is used. But in any case, the martyrology commemorates saints arranged according to the calendar days of their deaths, from January the 1st down to December the 31st. And since death is the equivalent of Christian birth or spiritual birth, commemorations are normally prefaced by the Latin word natalis, the natale, which means nativity of or birth of. Sometimes the names of the dead are accompanied by the names of the places in which they died, but not always. Now, you have a calendar as well as a martyrology. And calendars were used by specific churches rather than throughout the universal church, as it were. So Dublin, for instance, the Diocese of Dublin, would have its own calendar, and so would the other dioceses in the country. And they would have commemorations then of the local saints that are of importance within that particular diocese. You see a calendar on the left-hand side of your screen. Calendar, the month of June, I think it is, and you see a martyrology on the right-hand side. Now the calendar has many gaps, as you can see, because not every day you'd find a saint that would be commemorated, say, in the Diocese of Dublin. Whereas the martyrology draws its saints from all over Christendom. So that for the 21st of September that you see on the screen on the right-hand side, you see six entries, 6 commemorations on that page. You'd have as many more again on the next page for that particular day. The previous day, for example, you see that there were 10 commemorations. They drew their saints from all over Christendom. Now, originally, it was confined to martyrs, which is why it's called a martyrology. But very early on, they began to add people like bishops, holy bishops, confessors, patriarchs, apostles, episodes from the life of Jesus, like Christmas Day, for instance, and then the various feasts of the Virgin Mary as well. So, but it still retained the name martyrology. And the Irish were very familiar from early on with martyrologies and calendars, and Tala has a big role to play in that. But the texts that were kept here in Tala, and there were 2 that we know of, they can be dated to the early 9th century, to shortly after 800. But their history goes back to more than a century earlier, to the earliest Irish foundation in northern England, which is on the island of Lindisfarne, otherwise Holy Island, in what used to be known as Northumbria, now be Northumberland and Yorkshire together. Northumbria, during the 7th and the 8th century, was a place of great cultural flowering. And the influences that brought that about came from 2 different places, different directions. On the one hand, the Roman mission to Canterbury, which was sent by Pope Gregory the Great in the form of a man called Augustine, who evangelized the southern part of England. The other mission came from Ireland, via Iona. And the Roman mission brought to England continental learning and unprecedented access to books, schools, and Greek and Latin scholarship. The Irish mission brought instruction for English children, as well as their elders, by Irish teachers, in what the Venerable Bede, in his History of the English People, described as advanced studies and observance of the discipline of a rule. And the Irish also brought their alphabet to England. Those of you of my vintage, as it were, will remember from their school days learning Irish in the Cló Gaelch, as it used to be known, the Irish form of script, and seeing letters like G being written as you see it on the screen, D being written as you see it on the screen, T the same way, and so on. The Irish brought their script, the insular script, to England, and so one can say, and this comes generally as a very great surprise for English people, I wonder why, that it was the Irish who taught them how to write. So remember that. Now, familiarity of the Irish with calendar and martyrology can be seen at work as well through Northumbria, because the Northumbrians were very influential in the story of the martyrology of the Universal Church, the Roman martyrologies. And the earliest surviving copy of that comes to us courtesy of an Irish scribe, see on the right hand side there, written in an Irish hand, and it commemorates here the feast on February the 1st, the feast of Saint Bridget, and again in the calendar it commemorates also the feast of Saint Bridget. Now this martyrology comes to us not from Ireland, not directly from Northumbria, it comes to us from the continent. It comes to us from a place called Echternach in Luxembourg. It was done for a man called Willibrord, who had spent 20 years in Ireland before he went off to the continent to evangelize there. There he went first to the area about Utrecht in Holland, and if you visit Utrecht you'll find there an equestrian statue commemorating the saint. Afterwards he went down to where Luxembourg now is, to Echternach, and there a basilica grew up around his foundation. Okay, you see in the picture, here's a statue of him. 20 years before his arrival on the continent, he went directly from Ireland to the continent, and he was in exile at a place now called Clonmelch in County Carlow. That is where he had his foundation. And this identification of Clonmelch as the place where he lived, we owe to an archaeologist, to Tom Fanning, late Tom Fanning from Galway, who I'm sure was a friend of Leo's as well. There is no memorial, as far as I know, to Willibrord in Clonmelch either, but then time may bring one there. In any case, through people like Willibrord and other, they had a great influence on the way in which the Roman martyrology grew. And one form of it was an abbreviated form of the one you've been looking at up to now, and one of these was kept on Lindisfarne. Lindisfarne was founded by an Irishman called Aidan, and eventually a copy of this abbreviated martyrology went from Lindisfarne to Iona, to the home monastery, as it were, of Lindisfarne. We know that the text was kept in Lindisfarne for a while because there are various entries of various people commemorated in it who were of particular importance to the English. One of them is Pope Gregory the Great, then and now regarded as the apostle of the English, because it was he who sent St. Augustine to them. Another is George of Merry England, and he is given a special prominence as well. And this you will see in the text that came here, or was copied here in Tallinn. And about a dozen Anglo-Saxon saints are included in it as well. Among the dozen are such notable saints as Bishop Cuthbert of Durham and St. Wilfrid of Ripon. And all of these Anglo-Saxon saints had some connection with Lindisfarne as well. So we can be quite certain that the copy that was eventually arrived here in Tallaght had come, as it were, from Lindisfarne. But it didn't arrive directly from Lindisfarne in Tallaght, it went via Iona. And it's reasonable to imagine that a copy of the Lindisfarne text, as it were, martyrology, came to Iona about the time that the community converted to the Roman way of calculating Easter. I'm sure you'll have heard in some form or other of the Easter controversy and so on that went on for ages within the Irish Church, because the Irish were old-fashioned, as it were, and had their own system of calculating the date of Easter. And the Roman Church generally innovated and introduced a new system. The Irish weren't prepared to go along with this for a long time because they thought that they were in the right, and there was much controversy about it. And Iona was one of the last Irish bastions, as it were, in defence of the old system. And it wasn't until 716 that the community on Iona converted to the new date, and that would be a likely time for this martyrology to come to Iona. According to the Venerable Bede, Edgebert, who had previously been in exile from Northumbria in Ireland, was instrumental in persuading the community, or the monks of Iona, to conform to the new method. And the inclusion of his commemoration at the 24th of April would suggest that the martyrology was already on the island when he died in 1929. Because if you want to get into a martyrology, first of all, of course, you have to live a very saintly life, but you have to die as well. So only dead people are admitted. So we can assume that the martyrology was already on the island when he died in 729. How long it stayed on Iona, we can't say for certain, but again, we may assume that it probably came from Iona to Ireland about 740, when the so-called Chronicle of Ireland, which is at the base of all the Irish annals, that is the Irish history books, as it were, of the early period, is assumed also to have come from Iona to Ireland. So the things probably came together, martyrology and annals and so on. So that would be a likely date for its arrival in Ireland. But could it have come to Tallaght directly? No, because Tallaght was still only a glint in the eye of St. Maelruin at that stage. It hadn't yet been founded. We're talking about 740, we have to wait almost another 50 years before Tallaght is founded here. So where did it go? There's much evidence in the text to tell us. It went very probably to the church of Bangor in County Down, which was one of the more important early Irish churches. It was also the most important church closest to Iona. You can see its importance here by reference to the Mappamundi, the Hereford Mappamundi. I don't know if any one of you has been to Hereford, to the cathedral there, to see this Mappamundi, and Ireland forms part of it. And you can see that 4 places are named on it, 4 Irish places. One of them is Bangor, another is Dublin, incidentally, and Armagh. Kildare would be the 4th. Now, we can see in the text that comes to us from Tallaght eventually, that comes to us, we can see in the text how important Bangor was, or is presented in it. We can see it by reference to the feast of the founder patron of Bangor, whose name was Congal. And his feast day fell on the 10th of May. And he is described in it as Congal of Bangor, who died in the 91st year of his age, after an abbacy of 50 years, 3 months and 10 days. No other entry in the whole text has that kind of detail. So the person who wrote it in must have had a interest in Bangor. He must have been in Bangor, in fact. Because even while Ruin, when the text came down here to Tala, he doesn't get that kind of detail. And Columcille doesn't either. While the text was on Iona, only the name of Columcille was written into it. So Congal, that's a sign that the text was in Bangor for some time. And likewise uncommon, if not unique, is the mention of a lay person, a lay sibling of an abbot, a brother named Glasson of an abbot of Bangor named Colum. You see him pointed out there by the red arrow. And the two may have been brothers of Fiachna, the king of Ulster. So again, this is an indication that the text was in Bangor for a while. Another one is that of the 20 abbots of Bangor who were there down to about 750 or so, 16 of them are included in the text, and no other Irish church has as many of its early abbots included. Glendalough, for example, has only 3. So you see, again, the importance of Bangor. And Movilla as well, which is down the road from Bangor in Newtonards, it's only about 10 miles or so from Bangor. It has a lot of entries to its name as well. Now, when did the text come to Tala? We can't say for certain. Again. One thing is, however, certain, it can't have come here before 774, when the church was founded here in Tala. When was the text given its Tala character, the kind of character that it still retains today, due to all the additions that were made to it here in Tala? When? Up to 1990, when I published, the community of Tala, as you know, was deeply involved in the Anchoritic movement, the Céile Day of the late 8th and early 9th centuries, and this movement was marked by a renewal of the liturgy, and the liturgy is something to which the martyrology belongs, so that would have been an appropriate time, propitious time for the arrival of the martyrology here. And this liturgical renewal is otherwise shown by the Stone Missal, the earliest surviving Irish missal. And it's clear from internal evidence, as we'll see later, that that too was written here in Tala. Now, up to 1990, when I put forward a case for redating the martyrology and its daughter text, the martyrology of Eangus, the common opinion was that the texts were written up here in Tala about the year 800. And this common opinion was due to a German scholar by the name of Rudolf Thurneisen. And he had put forward this dating in the 1900s, in the early 1900s, that the work was being done here in Tala about 800. But as I pointed out in my article, there are a series of later commemorations as well in the texts that were produced here in Tala. One of the latest of which was of a man named Blaubuck, who was martyred by Vikings on Iona in 828. And so quickly did the news of this spread that shortly afterwards a life or an account of the martyrdom was given by a German cleric by the name of Walafrid Strabo on the Reichenau, on Lake Constance in southern Germany. And he did it in hexameter verse. So this was something that caused a great commotion, as it were, right through Christendom at the time. And the need for a martyrology would probably not have arisen here, in any case, until after a decision of the council held in Aachen in 817, which decreed that each monastery should keep a martyrology for use at the liturgical office of prime, which is the first office of the day. And that office, the first office of the day, is still the one where the martyrology is read in religious orders, for example. How many of you have been to Aachen?
No.
You have been? You remember perhaps then that there is a church dedicated to an Irish saint just under the shadow of the great cathedral of Aachen that you see here. And the Irish saint is called by the Germans Eulen, but in fact he's Saint Félon. He was a brother of Saint Forisy of Perron. Anyhow, the man in charge of the text, when it came here to Tallaght, was very probably Angus. And Angus, as you know, is the patron of your local Catholic church. Am I right?
Angus, yeah.
Bad Roderick. Bad Roderick.
It isn't the local Tallaght one,
Not
is it?
local Tallaght Church, not Bad Roderick Church.
There are approximately 12 in Tallaght.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So,
But,
it was one of the first modern, I'd imagine.
and which is the parish church, actually?
Yeah, Dominican.
Oh, is the Dominican one the parish church?
The Dominican church is
But that's the one dedicated to Angus, isn't it?
Yes.
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 And was
down.
a Dominican.
Only down
It's
the
a
road.
Dominican church.
Oh, is it right?
A daughter of the bride.
Okay. So in any case, it's dedicated to Angus, the author of the martyrology.
Yes.
Yeah. And once the text came here, Angus is likely to have been the person to keep it and write it up as well, because he was a bishop, and bishops have responsibility for the liturgy, and he would have done it on that basis. Now, we can't identify very much in relation to the entries that were added here in Tallaght, for the good reason that we know so little otherwise of the names that were put into the martyrology. And you see long lists of them there. We can only identify the additions made in Tallaght when specific mention is made of Tallaght in relation to them, such as the arrival of relics here in Tallaght. And you have two examples of that here. One on August the 10th, which is the Feast of Lawrence otherwise, a very famous early Roman martyr. And that, we're told there that this was the day on which Maelruin came with the relics of the saints, the martyrs and virgins to Tallaght. I suspect that this means that the church here in Tallaght was very probably dedicated on the 10th of August, because relics are very closely associated with dedications. And if Maelruin brought the relics here, then very probably to that specific purpose of they being there, as it were, when the dedication was made. But relics came on other days as well. There's one, the second one you see, that it came all the way up, the one for September the 6th, it came all the way up from Cork, from a very minor, obscure little church in North Cork, dedicated to a saint called Skene, Ardskene, near Butterfield is the name of the place. So there were relics coming into Tallaght, and we can identify these from the text. Now, unfortunately, no contemporary copy of the martyrology survives. Our earliest surviving copy comes to us from the 12th century, from a manuscript called the Book of Leinster, which was copied by a scribe named Éav, who was abbot of Terryglass down in Tipperary. But he was a Leinster man himself, and there is some dispute about where he would have been actually copying his manuscript. But there's good reason to believe that it was at Terryglass, because about that time the Church of Lurcha, which is also in North Tipperary, near Terryglass, held another text that was copied here in Tallaght, the original of the Stone Missal. And it was revered, highly revered, as a relic in Lurcha. So it's kind of probable that the martyrology would have gone to Lorha with the stone missal, and that then the A would have got a loan of it, as it were, from Terryglass and from Lorha, and did his work in Terryglass. Unfortunately, it's not complete, the copy. There's a gap, because one page went missing from the Book of Leinster. And this must have happened very early, because when Micheál O'Cladig, the celebrated Franciscan, was working in copying the saints from the text in the early 17th century, it was already missing at that stage. So sometime between 1200 and 1600 it went missing. Now, late as the surviving copy of the Martyrology of Tallaght may be, the surviving copy of its daughter text, the Martyrology of Angus, is the copies of the Martyrology of Angus are even later. Originally, the Martyrology compiled in metrical form by Angus would have consisted of a log, the Martyrology itself, and an epilogue, all of which survive. But in the 12th century, about the time that the copy was being made of the other Martyrology, the prose Martyrology as it were, a fresh copy was being done of Angus's text in Armagh. And at this stage, a preface was added to it, and numerous notes were added to it as well. And this copy is the one that comes down to us today, but not directly from Armagh, as we'll see. The sources used by the person who was working in Armagh included some other recent martyrologies, like the Martyrology of Gorman, which was done at Knockabby in County Louth, and this was used in about 200 or so passages in the notes that were added in Armagh. And also used was a martyrology of continental origin that came in the early 11th century from a monastery in Cologne that had an Irish abbot for use of the community in Christchurch, Dublin. It came from a Benedictine house in Cologne. Christchurch at the time was Benedictine here in Dublin, and Christchurch was just being built, in fact, around the time that the martyrology came here. 1030 is when Christchurch was founded. At that time there were two monasteries in Cologne, in fact, that had Irish abbots, two Benedictine monasteries. One is Gros St. Martin, which you see on the side of the River Rhine, and you can see that it's very close. I don't know if any of you has been to Cologne, but you can see it's very close to Cologne Cathedral, which is on the right hand side there. And then you have the other monastery, which is called St. Pantaleon, and it's about a quarter of a mile from Gros St. Martin. Now, the Armagh version of Angus's martyrology even reached Regensburg in southern Germany, where an Irish monastery called a Schottenkloster had been founded at the end of the 11th century. And we know this because, and there, if you visit Regensburg today, you'll see the wonderful entrance door here to the Irish church, to the Schottenkloster, as it is still called today. And the previous Pope, Pope Benedict, was based in Regensburg for quite a while, and this is now the diocesan seminary in Regensburg, and Benedict used to be in and out of it. We have a 17th century copy of the martyrology of the Regensburg Schottenkloster, and it preserves the most complete set of entries of Irish saints in any continental text, and comparison with feasts with the corresponding entries in Angus's text reveals a remarkable level of conformity. All 8 surviving manuscript copies of Angus's calendar date from 1350 onwards, as late as that. Consider that the martyr written here in Tallaght by Angus about 830, but all the surviving copies of it date from later than 1350. and we have 8 surviving copies of it. It was the most popular martyrology ever written in Ireland. The reason why all the copies date from that period is that there was renewal in the church at the time. All the different orders, the Franciscans, the Dominicans, and so on, they all underwent, as it were, renewal. It was known as modern devotion, devotio moderna. And as a result of the new, the churches, as it were fitted out with new liturgical books. And the martyrology was a liturgical book, so that was, they were all done over again. And what they did then with the earlier copies, of course, was just throw them out. Couldn't be bothered keeping them. About that time, many of Ireland's great manuscript miscellanies were done as well, like the Laur Briac on the left and the Book of the White Earl. And both of these contain copies of the Martyrology of Illness. We come to some few words on the local saints here. Saint Ruin, of course, founded the Annals, founded the Tala in the year 774, according to one set of annals only, the Annals of the Four Masters. But if you look closely at it, you'll see that the date on the screen is not 774, it's 769. And here you see Ruin, the first settlement in Tala of Ruin. Why do we say 774 therefore? Because this particular annals lagged behind the other annals 4 or 5 years, so the date is adjusted, as it were, from 769 to 774. So Ruin arrived in Tala at that time. His feast is, which you all know, I'm sure, fell on the 7th of July. He's not given first place in the list. That was copied here in Tala. First place is given to a very obscure person whom we know nothing else whatsoever. A man by the name of Tugvach or Trilvach. And then you have Ruin, Bishop of Tala. In the martyrology, he's also consigned to second place. First place is given to a man called Parmenius here in the text, but in fact the correct form of the name is Pantaenus, and he was head of the school of Alexandria in Egypt. Ruin is described as the splendid son of the Gaels island in solar terms. And in the prologue to the text, he is again described in solar terms as the great sun on Meath's south plain. This was considered to be part of the kingdom of Meath at that time. And his grave must have been a place of pilgrimage from very, very early on, because it is said there that it was a place of healing. And in the epilogue to his text, Angus describes Ruin as his tutor. May my tutor bring me unto Christ. Ruin is also commemorated in the Stone Missal, in a litany that's preserved there, and he's given first place. And you can see that his name is more prominently displayed, as it were, than other names in the list. And he is supposed to have been the author of some of the texts associated with Tala as well. For example, we have the text which is known as the Monastery of Tala, and we have the text which is known as the Rule of Tala, that is the monastic rule that was observed here in Tala. And these are supposed to represent the teachings of Ruin here in Tala. His pedigree or genealogy assigns him to a people in Ulster. His feast, as you know, continued to be celebrated right down into the 19th century with very large attendance at it, by which time, and I'm sure the people of Tallaght don't like to hear this, by which time he had come to be known as Mulroon or Mulrooney and came to be regarded as a female, whose loaf and griddle is to be shown here in the local graveyard. They still are there, of course, the base of a high cross and a hollowed out stone. Angus wasn't, his name wasn't put into the original copies of the martyrology here, of the two martyrologies, for the simple reason that he hadn't yet. But it was added to the martyrology, the local martyrology, after his death on the 11th of March, which means that he died on that day. And he had appealed, actually, in his metrical text, he had appealed to God to allow him to die during Lent. And March the 11th is probably a date that falls safely enough within Lent almost every year. In the martyrology, he, through all the saints who have gone before, as it were, to assist him in attaining heaven. And he also describes how the glory, as it were, of the churches that surround him, like Tallaght and others, by comparison with pagan centres of former times, the forgotten state of their tormentors who used these places, and compared the decline of such pre-Christian centres as Tara with the flourishing state of churches such as Armagh. And in the martyrology we get a glimpse of the personality that lay behind the saint, and that's something very rare in early Ireland, because we know very little about the actual saints themselves and their personalities. But Angus describes himself as a pauper. Pauper was used to describe a monk, a mendicant monk, and as a crow, he describes himself as a truer, a sort of a person to be commiserated, as it were, a miserable person. And he makes an appeal to thousands and thousands that have gone to heaven before him, headed by his teacher Mary Louis, for help in attaining his own salvation. In the preface that was added in the 12th century, a sort of a biography is concocted for him that brings him first to a place called after him in County Limerick, Dishert Nielsen, Dysart, now in County Limerick, and then he's brought to Coolbanagher, which is near another site called after him, Dysart Ennis in Laois. And there he...
that isn't it emo?
Yeah, it's not part of Emo.
Oh,
yeah.
So is that a Gavin church? No, that's not her church.
This is the ruin in Coolbanagher, it's not the Gandon one. The Emo. And he allegedly began his metrical martyrology there in Coolbanagher and came from there to Tallaght, where he completed them. Now we come to some other saints associated with this area, very few. One of them, two of them are Éanna and Lochon, who were associated with the Church of Kilmainham, which is within the civil parish in Tallaght, in any case. I don't know if there are any church ruins there now, but the two saints were associated with it, and they belonged, according to the genealogies, to the Dáil Meishin Curran as well, the same family as Kevin of Glendalough belonged to again. So again you see how Kevin of Glendalough had control, as it were, of the church. Of Glendalough had control of the churches in this area. And as a measure of the importance of Kilmainham at that time, Kevin is actually sent there for his initial school. There was a well named after him at Kilmainham. Is it still there?
There is a dedication to it,
Yeah.
stone around it, but there's no depth to the well that I can see.
Those were flattened on 1970.
They filled it in.
I see.
It tries to build houses on it, but couldn't, it was too wet.
Thanks to Kevin maybe for that. Now the feast day of the Jew fell on the 31st of December. The feast otherwise of Pope Sylvester. In fact, when we speak of New Year's Eve, the Germans speak of Sylvester. So it was a very important day in the Christian calendar as well. And down in Glenealy in County Wicklow, you have his namesake, a namesake of St. Erma. Mernogus is the name given to him. And his mother is said to have been a sister of Kevin of Glendalough. So they were probably originally one and the same. Finally, as far as the saints go, Santon of St. Anne's. Cassamucci. I don't know if the name's still used.
Yes, it is.
And it said he is said to have been a Santo, the king of the Britons. And the saint's name, it derives from the Latin word sanctus, holy, sanct in Irish then, and Santon, a little holy person as it were. And on the basis of his name and the Welsh background and the location of his church here close to Dublin, it has been argued that Santon may represent Samson of Dol in Brittany, whose very fine cathedral you see there in the image on the screen. And because he is said to have founded a church in the Dublin area. Now, of course, the name has been confused with the name of St. Anne to St. Anne. And exactly the same thing happened on the Isle of Man, where there was another dedication to Santon at a place called Kirk Santon, and that too has been changed to St. Anne's nowadays.
The local Gael scholars retains the name, it's named after Santon.
Oh, very good. Yeah, very good. We also know the hymn that he is supposed to have composed in Old Irish. It's called Atach Ri Mavra Mangin. I implore the wonderful King of Angels. Now, Tallaght Scriptorium, just to conclude, was one of the most active in the whole of Ireland, producing not only martyrologies, but also the Stowe Missal and other Céile Day texts, such as the Rule of Tallaght and the Monastery of Tallaght, besides the martyrologies. And it's little short of a miracle that we know so much about the products of this scriptorium from this particular period, because so little else has survived throughout Ireland from that period. So it's a measure of the importance of Tallaght. Much of my own work, as our chairperson has said in introducing me, over the years in the form of books, as well as various papers, owe a great deal to Tallaght. And I can only salute the memory of the members of Tallagh's monastic community, and especially, of course, that of Maelruin and Angus, the keeper of the martyrologies. So thank you for your attention. I hope I haven't gone on too long.
You joked there about the land of saints and scholars, little did they know. I presume you mean nowadays, but back in their day it would have been true when the barbarians swept across Rome and you know the old claim that you know the Irish saved civilization by bringing it back to the continent. Because I think I'm correct in saying that Tallaght and Finglas were known as the eyes of Ireland at the time.
They were indeed.
When you consider their modern day reputation, but hopefully when reclaiming that.
It's very true, and there was no church within what is now the old city, as it were, of Dublin, that had similar claims to fame, such as Tallaght and Finglas had at that period.
And you said there about the little St. Maelruin's cross, that's the loaf or missal, the base of a high cross, and that little stubby cross then has just been inserted into the base of a high cross.
That's what the archaeologists
about it.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm amused that my family is now settled in Coolbanagher, and so like Angus, I have come to Tala.
Okay, very good.
As near as I get to St.
Were you aware of that connection before?
I wasn't in my English, no.
And the move was direct from Coolbanagher to Tala.
Not quite as direct in my case.
Okay. And you didn't start writing anything in Coolbanagher that you completed here in Tala?
As a dyslexic, I refrain.
I might mention on the subject of Angus, there's a beautiful icon in St. Angus's Church, which was painted about 10 or 12 years ago by a nun. And it recounts the story of the student who went to him for lessons in Latin, the little boy who couldn't remember his Latin and passed his exams with flying colours. It said that that's how Melroon found out that Angus was a scholar and a writer. And also, I think it's very little known, almost 20 years ago, a kiln, a corn drying kiln, was dug up by the archaeologists at the edge of the foss which surrounded the monastery. And of course, the first job that Angus was given was to look after the kiln for drying the corn. So, and there were actually grains of corn in the kiln when it was taken up out of the ground, or burnt grains of corn. It's probably in the museum somewhere now.
Very interesting.
Should I speak for everybody here, Professor, when I say thank you for that wonderfully informed lecture? I just wanted to recall a small anecdote about the late Leo Swan. I had the great pleasure of attending some lectures that he gave to an underwater archaeological group. The lectures didn't occur underwater. He had no connection with underwater archaeology, but he gave us lectures on archaeology in general, and it was a wonderful experience because to attend Leo's lectures was like going to a show, a concert. That's the feeling that you got when you came away, as well as being greatly informed. But he told us one wonderful story about some excavations that he had done, and I can't remember exactly where it took place, on a church that had been closed down at the time of the suppression of the monasteries under Henry VIII, that he actually found where the actual doorstep of the church was, and in lifting it underneath he found a very large key. So apparently the way he interpreted that was that the last man out put the key under the stone. So, thank you very much again.
Thanks for that bit of course.
In your studies, would you have any thoughts of Kevin's influence coming from Tala to Glendalough, and how he would have built Glendalough, Glendalough might have developed on a model that may already have existed in Tala?
No, I don't think there's any evidence to say or suggest that it was in that direction, as it were, that the influences went. We know of Glendalough, that Glendalough would have very probably been there before Tala was founded. As well as that, the fact that you had this continuity in relation to the way in which Glendalough went on from having all these affiliated churches in and around South Dublin and Wicklow to becoming the diocesan centre later, would suggest that the influences, as it were, emanated from Glendalough rather than from Tala. Possibly Tala people might like to think it worked the other way, but...
Careful now, you've been making the headlines in the television. You don't want that. Someone ring the Sunday World.
We're not talking about the Cork Echo, is it?
So that's it. Thank you very much, folks, for your attendance here tonight. Just to let you know that there are one or two saints of our own here. We've St. Thomas here just to the front, St. Sheila there hiding down the back, and St. Anne around the room there. None of whom are saints as yet, but they are martyrs. What it calls.
And St. Anne definitely is a woman in this case.
Definitely. She's down there, to your right hand side.